All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a pretty provocative paper by Yaakov Kofer. He conducts what he calls a forensic audit of the 13.8 billion year age of the universe, and his argument is that, well, it's not what we think it is.
So this paper, it doesn't pull any punches. It opens with this absolute bombshell of a claim. Right from the get-go, it frames the whole conversation not as a matter of scientific discovery, but as a philosophical choice. It's a really bold way to kick things off, and it definitely sets the stage. Okay, so let's get into it. How does the author even begin to build a case like this? Well, he starts by arguing that this whole debate over the universe's age, it isn't really about physics at all. It's about philosophy. It's a question of what we can actually truly know about a past that we just can't observe directly. To make his point, he draws his really sharp line between two kinds of science. First, you've got operational science. That's the stuff you can do in a lab, right? Repeatable, testable experiments. But then there's historical science, which is much more like being a detective, trying to figure out what happened at a crime scene you can't revisit. The paper's whole argument hinges on the idea that cosmology belongs firmly in that second camp.
And yeah, the author does not mince words. The language is incredibly strong. The idea here is that the 13.8 billion year timeline isn't just a scientific conclusion. It's a belief system that's absolutely necessary for a worldview that needs to reject any possibility of a creator or a directed origin.
So, after laying out the philosophical stakes, the paper really gets going with its forensic audit. It starts listing several key pieces of evidence that, it claims, seriously chip away at that conventional timeline we're all so used to hearing about.
And the big question the audit is asking is pretty simple, right? What happens when you really stress test the basic assumptions that hold up this multi-billion-dollar story? Is the foundation solid, or are there some pretty serious cracks starting to show? The audit zooms in on some major problems that, to be fair, are being hotly debated in cosmology right now. It talks about the Hubble tension, this growing crisis where different ways of measuring how fast the universe is expanding just don't agree. It points to those impossible early galaxies the Webb telescope keeps finding, the ones that look way too old for their age. And it goes after what it calls the cosmological enron of the dark sector, the kind of awkward fact that for the standard model to work, we have to assume 95% of the entire universe is made of invisible stuff we can't detect.
And this is just a brilliant way to illustrate the paper's main critique of extrapolation. The argument is that measuring how things are changing now, like the universe expanding or atoms decaying, tells you a lot about the present, but it tells you absolutely nothing about how the whole system was set up in the first place. This leads to a pretty cool concept from systems theory called equifinality. Basically, it means that the way things are now could be the result of a whole bunch of different starting points. The evidence we have today is compatible with an infinite number of possible pasts, including one where the universe was created recently but already fully formed and functional.
Okay, so after trying to poke holes in the standard model, the paper puts its own alternative on the table. It's a timeline that isn't based on looking at the stars and working backwards, but on what it calls a historical and legal record. And the proposed alternative is this very specific number, 5786. Now that's the current year on the Jewish calendar. But the author makes a key distinction here. He argues this is not some religious guess. He presents it as a forensic legal constant, a timestamp that's been actively tracked and verified for thousands of years. So how in the world do you legally verify a date like this? Well, the argument is pretty unique. The paper claims this date has been put to the test, under penalty of law, every single day for millennia. It's used in legal documents, think contracts, marriage certificates, divorce bills, where if you get the date wrong, the entire document becomes legally worthless. The author argues that this constant, high-stakes process makes the calendar a super stable, high-precision signal, not some fluctuating scientific theory.
And this really gets to the heart of the contrast the paper is trying to draw. On one side, you have the standard model of cosmology, which the paper says is in a state of crisis. And on the other, you have this legally vetted timestamp, which is presented as something stable and unchanging. One is a model that's always in flux. The other, it argues, is a constant.
So this all builds to the paper's final argument, its grand conclusion. And it's not a choice between science and faith. Instead, it's a choice between what the author calls two different kinds of miracles. The paper frames the choice like this. On one hand, there's the standard model, which it calls a stochastic miracle. That's where incredible, fine-tuned order somehow emerges from a chaotic random singularity. Then, on the other hand, you have an architectural miracle, where all that amazing complexity and function is the starting point of the universe. The paper's point is that both options require a starting condition that's beyond the physics we know. And to really hammer this point home, the author brings out that classic analogy. The idea is that believing in a purely random origin for our incredibly precise cosmos requires a leap of faith in an event that is, let's just say, statistically unlikely.
And here's the final punch. The paper's ultimate conclusion is that the standard model is, itself, an act of faith. It just places its faith not in a designer, but in what it calls the idol of chance.
And that's where this whole audit leaves us. It leaves us with a pretty fundamental question. When we look deep into space and time, are we actually discovering a timeline that's already there? Or are we just projecting a timeline based on the assumptions we start out with? It really makes you think, not just about what we know, but about how we think we know it.